Daniel Cruz clicked accept on his first freelance invoice. The screen flickered, then displayed the total, $75. He refreshed the page twice. After the platform fees and the tax deduction, his actual take-home pay was exactly $48.20. He leaned back, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor of his cramped apartment. The room was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He looked at the balance, then out the window at the gray, crowded street below. This was not just currency. It was a digital key. He stood up, grabbed his laptop, and shoved it into his bag. He did not look around the room or hesitate. He opened his browser, navigated to a travel site, and searched for flights to the other side of the world. He picked a city where the rent cost a fraction of his current life and clicked purchase. The receipt confirmed a one-way ticket. He snapped his bag shut, turned off the lights, and walked toward the door. The uncertainty of the departure felt better than the certainty of staying. The reality of the move arrived within the first week. The apartment was cheap, but the connection was unreliable. Daniel spent his mornings crouched by the router, watching the signal bars drop to zero. Twice, the internet died in the middle of a high-stakes client call. The silence that followed was heavy. The emails arrived shortly after. Contracts terminated. Projects handed to someone with a stable signal. He checked his bank account. The funds from his initial freelance job were gone. He sat at a wooden table in the dark, the streetlights outside casting long shadows across his floor. There was no money for takeout. He boiled water and measured out a single serving of plain rice. The steam rose in the dim light, smelling of nothing. He held the spoon, his hand shaking slightly. The temptation to book a return flight was a physical pull, a weight pressing against his chest. He looked at his laptop, dark and dormant on the table. It felt like a useless anchor. He ate the rice in silence, listening to the city outside, wondering if he had traded his stability for a slow descent into total collapse. He reached for his notebook, his fingers brushing against the worn paper. He turned to a page filled with his own hurried handwriting and stopped at a single sentence from Napoleon Hill. Persistence transforms temporary defeat into eventual success. He read it again, then a third time. He did not buy a flight home. He closed the notebook, pushed the rice bowl aside, and opened his laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating his tired face. He opened a new document and began to list his deficits, one by one. He needed a better strategy. He spent the next 10 hours in that chair, ignoring the hunger and the heat of the room. He parsed through complex search engine optimization manuals, taking notes until his wrists ached. He built a new portfolio, rewriting every pitch and redesigning every sample. He did not leave his seat for water or air. He watched the sun rise through the window, his eyes stinging from the glare of the code and the text. He was no longer reacting to failure, he was engineering a way around it. By the time he finally closed the lid, his mind felt sharp, focused, and weaponized for the work ahead. The next morning, Daniel drafted a new set of rules. He would live on 30% of his income and funnel the rest into assets. He opened a spreadsheet, his fingers flying across the keys to calculate his survival threshold. While other nomads flocked to the city bars, nursing drinks under flickering neon, Daniel sat in a quiet local cafe. He ordered a single black coffee and stayed for 6 hours. He studied the works of Warren Buffett, his eyes moving from textbook to bank portal, timing his entry into low-cost index funds. Every time his balance hit a specific threshold, he clicked buy without hesitation. He watched the numbers shift, a slow climb mapped in rows and columns. When a group of travelers invited him out for a night of luxury, he looked at his screen, then at the empty seat across from him. He declined with a polite nod and returned to his calculations. He felt the weight of the choice, a sharp, lonely pressure, but it was matched by the growing stability in his account. He was no longer just working for the day. He was building a mechanism that would work while he slept. The cafe grew dark, the streets filled with noise, but Daniel remained, tethered to the steady rhythm of his own compounding wealth. Months blurred into years, measured not by the seasons, but by the changing views from his workspace. 1 week, Daniel sat at a heavy wooden desk in Bali, listening to the rhythmic crash of the ocean. The next, he was on a wrought iron balcony in Lisbon, the city bells echoing through the narrow streets. Later, he worked from a glass-walled apartment in Medellin, watching the mountain fog roll over the skyline. In every location, He pinned a fresh paper calendar to the wall. He did not use it for appointments or social events. He used it to track the sum of his net worth. Each Friday, he entered a new figure in red ink. The numbers climbed steadily, a jagged line moving upward across the grid. He moved through these cities as a ghost, rarely lingering in the tourist hubs or the crowded plazas. His focus remained fixed on the screen and the spreadsheet. He learned the rhythm of each city, but he never let it distract from the task. By the time he left Medellin, the calendar was covered in dates and growing totals. He had mapped his own financial trajectory against the backdrop of the world, proving that he could build a foundation, no matter where he stood. The ink on the wall was his only constant, a physical record of his patience and the slow, inevitable accumulation of his own future. A traveler from the next table leaned over, gesturing toward Daniel's worn gear and the simple meal sitting before him. "You have been in 3 countries this year," the man said, his tone dripping with curiosity. "Why live like a pauper when you have the income to live like a king?" Daniel did not look up immediately. He finished typing a row into his spreadsheet, pressed enter, and then turned the laptop screen toward the man. It was not a bank balance, but a graph. A steady, rising curve of compounding dividends projected years into the future. The traveler stared at the lines, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Daniel pulled the laptop back, his movements precise and calm. "I travel for the experience," Daniel said, his voice level and devoid of apology. "But I invest so that I never have to stop." He closed the lid with a soft click, effectively ending the conversation. The traveler sat back, silent. While Daniel returned to his work, he had heard the question a dozen times before, but it no longer carried the sting of doubt. He understood the math of his own life. He was trading the fleeting comfort of today for the absolute ownership of his tomorrow. First, and he would not trade that certainty for a seat at any luxury bar. It was a Tuesday, the air thick with the salt spray of the Pacific. Daniel found a spot on the cliffside where the wind roared, drowning out the distant hum of the city. He pulled his laptop from his bag and set it on the flat stone surface. His hands moved with a deliberate, practiced rhythm. He opened the browser, navigated to his brokerage portal, and hovered his cursor over the login button. The sun beat down on his shoulders, warming his skin, but his focus remained locked on the matte screen. He took a long, steadying breath. This was not a random check. It was the date he had circled on his internal calendar for years. He clicked. The page began to load, a thin blue bar creeping slowly across the top of the display. He felt the weight of every missed deadline, every night of plain rice, and every hour spent refining his portfolio. The cursor pulsed in the login field. He entered his credentials, his fingers striking the keys with mechanical precision. The screen flickered, the page shifted, and he paused, his heart rate steady but his eyes wide. He waited for the connection to finalize, the vast horizon of the ocean stretching out before him, mirroring the silence that had settled in his chest. The data began to populate the screen. The blue bar vanished, the screen refreshed, and the numbers locked into place. 1 comma, then another. $1 million. Daniel sat perfectly still. The wind continued to whip against the cliffside, but the sound seemed to drop away entirely. He did not lean forward. He did not shout. He did not reach for his phone to share the news. The digits stared back at him, static and final. He felt a sudden, sharp pressure in his chest, a physical manifestation of the thousands of hours he had spent in cafes, libraries, and rented rooms across a dozen time zones. Every sacrifice he had made to reach this moment, the missed opportunities, the solitary nights, the relentless focus on the spreadsheet condensed into this single line of text. He blinked, expecting the numbers to shift or dissolve, but they remained fixed. The reality of the amount was less about the spending power and more about the closure of a long, grueling chapter. He pulled his hands back from the keyboard and rested them on his lap. His breath came slow and deep, rhythmic and steady. He was not looking at a fortune. He was looking at the finish line of a race he had run entirely on his own terms. The silence around him deepened, heavy with the gravity of the achievement. He reached for the trackpad, his finger trembling slightly as he opened the subfolder he had not touched in years. A PDF icon appeared. Invoice 1. He double-clicked. The file opened, casting a soft white light against the $1,000,000 balance on the browser tab. The two figures sat side by side on his screen. $75, $1,000,000. He traced the small, jagged font of the original document, remembering the cramped apartment and the flickering light of his first desk. He did not see the money. He saw the path. He saw the transition from a man who sold his time for $75 to a man who controlled his own existence. The realization took root. The wealth was not the sum at the end of the line, but the accumulation of every choice he had made while moving from city to city. Every flight, every rejection, and every hour of disciplined investment had been a brick and a foundation he built beneath his own feet. He looked at the screen and saw the ownership of his life fully realized. He had not just traveled the world, he had purchased his own freedom, one day at a time, until the debt of his existence was paid in full. Daniel pressed the power button. The screen went black, mirroring the quiet street outside. He stood up, pushed the chair back against the wall, and left the laptop on the table. He did not look back. He stepped out of the cafe and onto the pavement. The city noise rose to meet him, the hum of distant traffic, the chatter of vendors, the rhythmic pulse of life, but it no longer felt like a distraction. It felt like a backdrop to his own existence. He started walking. He passed a bank, a row of crowded offices, and a construction site. Noticing the grind of those still trading hours for sustenance, he felt no urge to join them. He reached into his pocket, felt nothing but the empty space where his keys once lived, and kept moving. Every step he took was his own. Somewhere in the digital ether, his investments were shifting, reinvesting, and growing, entirely untethered from his physical location. He turned a corner, entered the flow of the crowd, and vanished into the city. He was no longer running toward a goal. He was simply living, while his wealth worked in the silence behind him.